Slash Filmcast, the official podcast of slashfilm.com. I'm David Chen, and with me are
Vindra Hardwire,
Jeff Kanata,
and joining us today, she's a staff writer at slashfilm.com and a frequent presence on Slash Film Daily. Hui Chen Bui, welcome back to the Slash Filmcast. HT, how are you doing today?
Hey everyone, I'm happy to be here, and I'm good, thank you.
Glad to have you back, and what better time to have you back than today, when we'll be discussing a few things, but the thing that we're most looking forward to talking about is Crazy Rich Asians. So we're going to be reviewing that coming up shortly, and following that up with a Slash Filmcast After Dark, where we're going to dive into HBO's original series Succession, which is a show that all three of us have been completely obsessed with. In the last
you could call it Crazy Rich Caucasians.
Yeah, you could call it that. HT won't be joining us for that. HT, you have not seen Succession yet, right?
No, I've heard good things, but I just could have not picked it up.
Yeah,
okay.
In the twilight of the summer, when the show is already over and interest has largely waned, we're like, hey, we gotta get a review of this show out there, because I mean, I think Jeff, you and I both watched this entire thing within the span of like 2 weeks, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, we devoured it. At least I did, and I feel like I'm very glad I didn't watch this in HBO real time. I'm glad I waited until it was bingeable, because it was a show I wanted to binge.
Indeed. So look forward to that in the After Dark, right after our review of Crazy Rich Asians. But before that, we have a few announcements and some emails we want to read. You can always email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. You can also find any episode of the show at slashfilmcast.com, or at least the last 100 or 30 episodes or so. And first of all, I want to address something that we've gotten tons of emails about. Emails, tweets, probably something that is one of our most requested features, which is timestamps in show notes. A lot of people tell us that when they listen to this episode, an episode of the Slash Filmcast, they often have not seen the film yet, or they're going to watch the movie later, and so they listen to the non-spoiler section, and they want to find the spoiler section later on in time when they listen to the podcast again. And I used to include show notes that were very detailed about when you could find our review and our segments, and when things began and when things ended, and when spoiler section began. And I stopped doing that recently. And there's a reason for that, which is that our podcast host does not... let me do that again. Our podcast host uses dynamic ad insertion, and what that means is basically they run ads on the podcast, and sometimes they remove those ads, and sometimes they insert new ones, and sometimes the ads are of different lengths. So basically, any timestamps I put in there are very likely going to be inaccurate within the span of a few weeks. And I felt like it was better to not include timestamps at all, rather than include timestamps that might be inaccurate. But I'm revisiting the wisdom of that decision after all these emails that we've gotten. A lot of people have suggested putting in podcast chapters, but unfortunately our podcast host also does not allow podcast chapters. Like the way they distribute the file, it does not allow for podcast chapters. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to try this out for the next few episodes. I'm going to try putting in an approximate time. I'm going to just put with a little squiggly line and say about 32 minutes in, Crazy Rich Asians review, and so on. And we'll see how that goes. And that time is going to change, and it's going to become inaccurate. And if people write in and say, hey, I accidentally fast-forwarded to spoilers for the M. Night Shyamalan film Split by accident, then I'm going to stop doing that. But if
it should only be inaccurate by 45 seconds, a minute at most.
I don't
know,
so Jeff. Some of these ads can go on for 5 minutes.
I don't know if I'm sure they're very, very short and palatable for everyone.
So the ads might, the timestamps might be off by a few minutes, and hopefully it's accurate enough that people can find their place. When we have multiple reviews, like today we're going to do Crazy Rich Asians and Succession as multiple reviews, I'm going to try to put in a healthy music or trailer cue in between them, so you can, if you're fast forwarding, you can kind of listen for that.
Little girl from Ipanema action.
Yeah, something like that. That's all I can do though. Usually it's going to be more relevant to what is being reviewed, Jeff. But,
I just thought it would just he's the girl from Ipanema every time. Just people know. Just listen.
That's
for
just what's running through Jeff's mind.
Yeah, that's
like
this is Jeff's head at all times. Is that?
Yeah, only when Dave's talking. That's what I actually hear.
Oh, nice. So that's what we're going to do for show notes. I'm going to put approximate times in there, and hopefully it's going to work for people. And if it doesn't, and people complain, then they're just going to go away, and we're going to go to what it is right now, which is no timestamps whatsoever. So thanks to everyone for writing in and sharing your feedback at /filmcast@gmail.com. And speaking of /filmcast@gmail.com, I wanted to read this email from Ryan C., who writes into /filmcast@gmail.com from Knoxville, Tennessee. Ryan writes in, quote, "Just real quick, I, too, saw The Meg, hoping for Piranha 3D type stupidity, and I was surprised to find that the film took itself so seriously for so long. Overall, I had fun with the film, but when it ended, I really wanted that over-the-top, hard R-rated shark movie with blood and guts. But then I went to the bathroom. When I went to the bathroom, and this is going to sound real weird, so bear with me for a second, there were 3 sets of little boys with their dads, and they were all talking about how much they enjoyed the film. The dad next to me was asking his son what his favorite part was, and he responded, when he found out there was a second shark. Spoilers for the Meg.
Yeah.
So then I thought, if this had been rated R, these kids wouldn't have been able to go in and enjoy the film with their dads. I remember fondly being a little kid and standing in line for Independence Day, and just the anticipation. And then after the film, just the feeling of having every single one of my expectations met with it. The Meg is no ID4, but you get the comparison. So in closing, I thought the film was fun. I'm glad it was watered down. And I think that overall helped contribute to its large opening. Love the show. End quote. That email comes from Ryan, writing
Think
in
about the children. The children have to enjoy their shark movies.
They're giant shark movies, yeah.
Yeah. Ryan's obviously responding to our review of The Meg last week. And what do you think, guys? I mean, we had expressed disappointment that it wasn't over the top bloody and trashy, but maybe The Meg is going to be a gateway drug for the youngins of today to get hooked on cinema. What do you think? Do you guys think
that's always a thing? But yeah, nothing is preventing a very irresponsible parent from just letting their child watch a hyper-violent version of The Meg. I saw RoboCop when I was like 8.
Yeah,
and I turned out
yeah,
right.
Devindra turned out completely fine with no flaws whatsoever.
Right. Yes. My biggest complaint with this email is that he holds up ID4 as some sort of good movie, which it is not.
Jeff,
Jeff.
ID4 was a formative experience for many people in their youth,
I agree,
including myself. Including myself.
Okay. Right.
I feel like it's all nostalgia holding up that movie, but it's a thing. It's a force of nature.
I also want to point out, by the way, that the hashtag #SaveDaveWave is out in full force. And, for David Chen, me, to win the summer movie wager, The Meg needs to unseat Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again as number 10 at the box office this summer. And unfortunately, I got a prediction from a Scott Mendelson, who writes for Forbes' Ticket Booth column, which is a great column about the box office. He does not think The Meg is going to overtake Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again.
Didn't he think Skyscraper would do super well too?
I mean, he may have written about that, but
he may have ghost written Dave's list.
Yes, yes.
The Meg is probably going to top out at $116 million, and Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again is probably going to make 120 as of Labor Day, which is an excruciating way to lose the summer movie wager. I just want you guys to know. It's going to come down to $5 million, and literally 1 point is how much I'm going to lose by.
Sounds like
you to shout. Go ahead.
Well, sounds like the kids love their feel-good musicals more than they love their watered-down shark movies.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the kids will be all right. But
Dave,
I'm
we
not
need
feeling
you to
good
shout
about it.
your best Mamma Mia once this is done, just like in Rage, like Khan or something.
Yeah, I'm going to do a Mamma Mia screaming up into the sky for sure. Okay. So you can always write into us at /filmcast@gmail.com. And finally, one other thing I wanted to address before we get going today, which is, I've been doing this podcast for over 10 years. This podcast has survived many living situations, many roommates, many relationships, many friendships, many jobs. It's been with me through many, many life phases, and I just wanted to disclose the newest life phase that I'm a part of, which is that I recently took a job at Amazon Prime Video. And so I just think it's important for everyone to know that. Like a few weeks ago, I started working for Prime Video. And what that means for the podcast is basically that I'm just not going to talk about anything related to Amazon Prime Video. You guys can talk about it, but I will not, because it's part of the company that I work for. So anyway, wanted to throw that out there, make sure people understood that. And it's going to be very relevant for today. Because Devindra, you've been watching something from Amazon Prime Video, right?
I have. I've been watching the new Jack Ryan show, which is very good. And I'm very sad we can't talk about it together, Dave. But congrats on your job.
Thank you.
And I do also want to say, I guess, congrats to Amazon for finally having, or at least for resurrecting Jack Ryan in a way that's pretty fantastic.
I thought you were going to say congrats to Amazon for hiring Dave Chen.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a completely valid way to congratulate Amazon.
I would more thank Amazon for getting Jack Ryan right, because we know how hard that is.
I don't know. I think those two things are equally congratulatory worthy, but whatever.
Yes.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the series?
Yeah, I didn't have much faith in this just because I'm not I've seen all the Jack Ryan movies. I don't have any particular attachment to the character. He's always struck me as the analyst who just gets in way above his head, and that's every movie, right? But this show is just so well written. It is sort of like when Homeland was really smart. So it's a really smart show about counterterrorism. And also the cast is fantastic. John Krasinski is kind of the perfect Jack Ryan. He is the perfect guy you could believe would be behind a desk most of his life, but also, as he's kind of proven over the past couple of years with his movie choices, especially The Quiet Place and that military one he did, he's a decent action star now too. And this role kind of has him in both, kind of doing both things. He's a guy behind the desk, but he's also had some actual action experience. And I think it's just a really smart show. It's about him tracking a supposed terrorist in the Middle East that nobody believes. Of course, nobody believes him. This guy actually exists, and then something big happens, and then all of a sudden everybody has to listen to everything Jack Ryan says. But I think it does a good job of portraying the actual backstory of who this person, who the bad guy is, and kind of what leads him to do what he's doing. And also, on the U.S. side, Jack Ryan is an interesting character. He's kind of a funny guy. His boss, who inevitably hates him and is the police chief who just shouts, "Jack Ryan, get into my office," is played by Wendell Pierce. And I love Wendell Pierce. He gets to be an action guy in this show. It's actually, I wouldn't have imagined that, especially after Treme, where he's just lounging around, right? With his, was he a saxophone player? He was just lounging around, being, as I guess lazy as a character as he can be. He just wants to relax. This guy, he's a hard ass boss, but he will get in the action. He will strap on an assault rifle and start defending his territory if he needs to. The show, it just has a lot going for it. I think it's a very smart take on the spy and counterintelligence genre. Good action, good writing, good characters. It's really all I ask for. And it also looks very good too. I think a lot of TV shows just tend to look cheap these days, especially action oriented ones. This show looks like a decently budgeted Hollywood thriller, and you can really tell that from some of the action set pieces too. So all in all, very good. And if you're interested in the Jack Ryan character, I think you'll be very happy with what they're doing here. Cool.
Well, that's Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, and it is on Prime Video on August 31st, I believe, is when you can see it there. Devindra, what else have you been watching?
Also, I've been watching Castle Rock on Hulu, and this is a show that's vaguely, it's set in the Stephen King universe, but it's not really about any specific Stephen King stories. It's sort of like what they did with the Fargo show, but there are certainly Stephen King themes and references, the Shawshank Jail is a big part here. One character, names himself after the Shining folks, last name Torrance, right? There are a lot of nice little nods here, and I think it really gets the mood and vibe of Stephen King's work really well. Also a strong cast here as well. It stars Andre Holland as a guy who's coming back to Castle Rock. He kind of grew up there. Something mysterious happened in his past that may or may not be like supernaturally related. He gets called back there because somebody finds a prisoner just kind of like trapped in Shawshank, and nobody knows how he got there. And that's I don't even know if they give him a name. He's a character played by Bill Skarsgård. So he's back in the Stephen King universe. He's the guy who played, It the Clown. But it's just him.
I believe
being
Pennywise was the name. Pennywise.
Yeah, Pennywise and It. Sorry. But he is here being creepy face once again in a Stephen King property, and I think like you could just cast him in everything. As like a Stephen King story. I could see him playing Christine, the talking car, or the killer car at some point. He's just doing really good here. The show itself, I think, has a lot of great, the production values are great. I think it's like decently creepy. It is one of those streaming shows I feel like doesn't have enough momentum all the time. So it sometimes feels like it takes a while to get where it's going. But in general, I like where it's going. So I'll keep watching.
Cool. That's Castle Rock, and it's streaming right now on Hulu.
Yep.
And that's what Devindra's been watching this week.
It's is it like a good horror show, Devindra? Is it like actually horror, or is it?
Yeah. It's like it's horror in the way that like a lot of Stephen King stories are. Like it's definitely creepy. There are definitely jump scares. There are things. There's like a greater mythology that will kind of creep you out. I don't think it's much as a horror show as something like Channel Zero is, which is like fantastic horror. This is just like a nice, creepy, weekly mystery series for Stephen King fans, basically.
You know, it's a horror to me, fellas. Deciding what to eat every night. Nothing more horrific than trying to figure out what to eat, trying to eat well, trying to feed my family. Luckily, our sponsor, Green Chef, is here for me. Actually, this is a really big one for me because you guys have heard me talk about HelloFresh before on the show. Green Chef is now owned by HelloFresh. They've combined forces to create one awesome company. And the cool thing about Green Chef is there is a huge variety of meal types. So my wife, bless her soul, is dealing with one of the most horrible things for people like us who love to eat. And that is our little daughter, who's just barely 3 months old, is having some reflux issues. And so my wife is having to change her diet because she's breastfeeding, and we're trying to figure out if there's some sort of allergy there. So she's had to adopt these really restrictive diets, which is hard anyway. But in order to eat well and do the kind of things we like to do, which is like have HelloFresh and cook at home with these awesome meal plans, we were worried that we weren't going to be able to do it. But Green Chef has crazy meal plans, a crazy variety of meal plans, including paleo, vegan, vegetarian, keto, gluten-free, omnivore, and carnivore. So we were able to switch over to Green Chef, get the vegan plan for my wife so that she wouldn't have any of the, she could stay on her crazy strict restrictive diet. And we still eat really, really well with delicious meals that fill us up, that taste great. Green Chef is a USDA certified organic company, and that includes everything that you need to easily cook delicious meals that you can feel good about. These are really, really fun to prepare. They're fast. They're easy. In fact, Green Chef believes that you shouldn't have to spend all night in the kitchen to do things. You actually get pre-made sauces, dressings, and spices so that you get more flavor in less time, which is great. I mean, I like cooking myself, but sometimes it's nice to just have the sauce already done. They do all the grocery shopping and meal planning for you, and most of the prep work for you week to week. So you're getting really good meals that you make yourself. They're they're doing all that stuff. They're deciding what the recipe is going to be, which I like because I don't like to waste my time trying to figure out what to eat. And it's easy to maintain a specialty diet and still eat really, really well and taste great. Green Chef's expert chefs design recipes with gourmet flavor that you typically only find in restaurants. My wife and I always comment on how this feels like if we went to a restaurant and had this, we would love it. So for $50 off your first box of Green Chef, go to greenchef.us/filmcast. That's greenchef.us/filmcast. patreon.com/filmcast for $50 off your first box. Give it a shot. I think you'll like it.
Sorry, guys, just making the timestamp note. Also, HT, sorry you have not had the opportunity to contribute anything in the first 20 minutes, but I promise we're going to get to you very momentarily.
It's cool.
All right, here we go. Before we get to our review of Crazy Rich Asians, I want to thank all the people who donated to the podcast this week. Thanks to new subscribers, Jeffrey Engelstein, Jordan Cohen.
Hey, Jeff Engelstein.
Jeffrey Engelstein.
He's awesome. He's a very notable board game designer and a friend of mine. He's awesome that he's donating.
Awesome. Jordan Cohen, Ryan Cashmere, Greg Schatzman, Dan Kramer, and Brandon Rhodes. Thank you so much for your regular contributions at the rate of $2 per month. We also want to thank all the people who made regular donations. David Mason, Martin Wegner, Ben Sandy, Priscilla Garcia, who canceled MoviePass and said, hey, this is a better use of the $10 that I'm donating.
Wow.
William Kang and Kevin in Vermont, who wrote in the following. I wanted to donate in support of Dave's generous Crazy Rich Asians screening. I admire the perspectives and convictions all of you bring to the show. Tons of respect to you and your wife, Dave, for the time, effort, and money put into hosting the screening. I'll be seeing Crazy Rich Asians. But does it count if I use my membership in an exclusive subscription service from a particular national movie chain? ? The answer to your question, Kevin, is yes. But thanks so much for your contributions, all of you, and Kevin, really appreciate giving us a shout out. What we did, of course, and I'm going to talk about it momentarily, is my wife and I hosted a screening of Crazy Rich Asians in the Seattle area to give the movie a big opening weekend, to try our best to give it a big opening weekend. And we'll talk in a moment about whether we succeeded or not.
I love the idea of someone donating to us in lieu of MoviePass. And I think we should adopt the same philosophy where if they try to cancel their donation, we just don't let them. Wouldn't that be great? We should just... It seems to be working great.
You can never leave.
Resubscribe. Yeah,
I'll think about that, Jeff. But anyway, you can always donate to this podcast by going to paypal.me/filmcast. That's paypal.me/ and then the word filmcast. You can also go to /film.com, click on the /filmcast tab, and use the PayPal links on the side of the page. Thanks again. Let's get to our review of Crazy Rich Asians. Okay, give me a second. Okay. That was from the trailer for Crazy Rich Asians, the new film by director John Chu that's out in theaters right now, based on the popular series of novels by writer Kevin Kwan. I'm going to read the plot summary from IMDb. This contemporary romantic comedy based on a global bestseller follows native New Yorker Rachel Chu to Singapore to meet her boyfriend's family. Now, before we get into this review, guys, I wanted to just talk briefly about the screening that I held for Crazy Rich Asians at Regal Meridian in downtown Seattle. When my wife and I decided to host a screening, we thought it'd be like a pretty small thing. We would announce it on the podcast, and like that would basically be the end of it. And so on Thursday night, like on Tuesday night, we published the podcast announcing the screening, and then on Thursday night that week, I was actually photographing a wedding. I was shooting a wedding, and I started getting like all these messages because this screening had been written about in the Seattle Times during the week. And then I started getting messages from local news anchors saying like, hey, we'd love to have you on to talk about the screening and why you're doing it. And I think it actually spread to like CBS This Morning. I was on CBS This Morning apparently. So I just want to, first of all, say thank you to all the journalists who covered this. They covered it, not just to elevate David Chen's profile, which I know we all think is a worthy cause, but they covered it because I think they wanted to give a shout out to this movement, this hashtag Gold Open movement of Asian Americans really investing in this movie, buying out theaters, and giving it a massive opening for a romantic comedy. It made $35 million over the opening 5 days that it was out in theaters. It's one of the biggest romantic comedies since, I think it was like Think Like a Man is the last romantic comedy that made as much money. That was in 2012.
I don't even know what that movie is.
Yeah. Think Like a Man, directed by Tim Story, in 2012, is the last PG-13 romantic comedy that did nearly as well as Crazy Rich Asians. So really happy that the movie performed admirably in its opening weekend at the box office. I'm interested to see what the drop is going to be like. Because literally hundreds of people did buy out theaters. So I'm wondering like how much that juiced the rankings. But I do think that the movie is also very enjoyable. And my wife, as we're recording this, my wife is actually seeing the film a second time right now. So one other thing I wanted to mention, which is I wanted to say thank you to all the people who came to the screening. A lot of very, very nice Slash Filmcast listeners who came to the screening and said hi and had been listening for many years. Really, really appreciate everything that you guys did to come out, spread the word of the screening. It was so nice to meet you guys there. And I think everyone came to the screening. They laughed, had a great time. So really appreciate the presence of all the Slash Filmcast listeners and anyone else who came. All of them, that is, except for one person, which is when we held the screening, I had roped off 10 seats to be reserved for my family. Like my parents were there, my wife's parents were there, and we had roped off these like 10 seats out of this theater of like over 100 to be reserved for close friends and family. And this dude sat in one of the reserved seats, and then I said, "Hey," like I came up to him, I said, "Hey, this seat's reserved." And, long story short, refused to leave one of the seats.
Gotta love it.
Refused to leave.
Well, how did he just said no?
No, he was like, he basically was like, well, I'm like, oh, hey, did you know this was reserved? And he's like, oh, well, this was open when I got here, so I just sat here. And I said, hey, do you mind like sitting over there? Because there's still like open seats in the theater. And so I said, hey, do you mind sitting at one of these open seats? And he expressed that he was willing to do this, and then just didn't move. Like he's like,
was he aware that he didn't pay to come in?
I think he was aware of that. Because shortly after we had this interaction, I went to the front of the theater and announced that I was the person that had paid for every ticket.
Did you stare him in the eye as you said that?
It put me in a very challenging situation because I'm like hosting all the like my friends, like people who are important to me are in the theater. You know what I mean? And so I don't want to like make a scene, but at the same time, I felt like grossly inconsiderate, Yeah.
But did you guys all sit around him and just like, you should have like left it for like your mom or your dad's like, well, there's no more seats.
Just like talk loudly over him.
Yeah, you guess you're gonna have to sit in the back of the theater, Dad.
Fortunately,
I know your dad.
Did your dad and then him and then your mom?
My friends were super cool about it, and they were like, "Oh, hey, Dave, you can sit here." Like, because he was sitting in his like all the reserved seats were already taken by the time I got to the except for this one, and so it was like me and my wife were gonna sit there. But my friends were super cool. They're like, "Hey, you can sit with us. It's all good." But it just was like, "Whoa, people, man. That's all I have to say about that. Anyway, enough of that. Enough of that unpleasantness. Let's get to our review of the film. So, HT, you write for slashfilm.com. You've written several pieces about Crazy Rich Asians for slashfilm.com. Crazy Rich Asians doesn't try to break stereotypes, and that's good. What Crazy Rich Asians gets right about Asian American identity. I want to talk to you about those pieces, and we'll link to them in the show notes. But before we get to them, I kind of want to hear overall, what were your thoughts on this film?
So I really enjoyed Crazy Rich Asians on multiple levels, actually, as an Asian American and as a rom-com lover. I have been anticipating this film since it was announced, and I was kind of nervously anticipating it because I had read the book, and I hadn't quite enjoyed the book as much as I thought I would, but I basically anticipated the film being much better version of that because it seemed like it was made for the cinema rather than just being kind of a list of designer clothes that were just on a page. So, and I was right. I really enjoyed that experience. I thought John Chu did a really great job of creating this flamboyant, fun, gaudy take on this sort of elite Singaporean class while anchoring it in this real emotional core that's that's Constance Wu's Rachel. And it was such a fun sort of homage to like a bunch of rom-com tropes that I really enjoy, as well as just kind of a surprisingly sincere portrayal of Asian American identity, as well as kind of the diaspora between mainland Asians and Asian Americans.
Very cool. Glad to hear you liked it. The person whose opinion I'm most interested in is Jeff Kanata. Jeff Kanata, what did you think of Crazy Rich Asians?
I thought it needed more white people
to really center the story around it, right?
Yeah. No, I'm kidding, of course. I found it delightful. I really did, and it is one of those very rare movies, and I think even more rare in this genre, the rom-com genre, where I really believe the third act is better than the first act. That almost never happens. It almost never happens, especially in these kinds of movies. In these kinds of movies, it's almost always way more fun to get the setup where all the funny stuff happens, and you get our the premise is really established in the first act, and you get all the reason that the movie is made is the first act. It's like all these wacky characters and all this crazy question of how it's going to work out. And usually the third act is the weakest part of a rom-com because it's kind of just going through the motions of getting the people together and paying things off and trying to be all plotty, and you tend to lose all the fun that you had, and it usually like slides into home rather than hitting a home run, Or that's a bad analogy. Sliding into home is very exciting. Yeah. You know what I'm trying to say.
Slides into home, but is tagged out before they get there. Huh?
Right. It's a coasting into the finish. There's some sort of sports analogy here that I'm failing on. Anyway, you understand what I'm saying. I find this movie to be better in the third act. I thought the third act was even better than the first act. I thought it felt to me a little slow to get going. It's really trying to juggle a lot of characters and introduce them all very, very fast. And I had a hard time sort of finding my footing in the first 20 minutes or so. Just felt like it was a little rushed and clunky, and maybe there's a longer edit of this movie. It's already a fairly long rom-com, but it really finds its way in the second and third acts, and the third act is delightful. It's fun. It made me cry. It is everything you want out of a movie like this. Sweet performances with very charming characters, very charming actors. I think that Michelle Yeoh is spectacular in this movie. Like the things that she does are so subtle and so beautiful and so effective. I found it to be much funnier in the second half than it is in the first half. The movie sort of found its humor there, especially when Ken Jeong shows up. My complaints with the movie are that I sort of inherently find the fetishization of wealth to be a little hard to swallow. And this movie balances that a little bit, but for the most part, it really is like, isn't it great to be filthy rich, And that's a trope in romantic comedies as well, where Prince Charming, and you find out that he's wealthy, and all these Pretty Woman does that, and all kinds of stuff.
I think the movie is commenting on many things, but I don't think it has that much to say about insane wealth and income inequality or anything like that.
I think the insane wealth becomes more of an entry point rather than an actual sort of subject of the film. It's just an easier access point for general audiences, because that's something we're used to seeing in rom-coms and something we're not used to seeing with Asians specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just, I don't know where I am in the world these days. It's just like, I have a hard time just having a lot of easy breezy fun with how great it is to be filthy rich. But and this movie sort of revels in that a little bit, and it's fine. There's some fun with it, but it is a little fetishized, I think. But overall, just a delightful experience. A movie that I sadly had to see by myself. I want to return and see it again in the theater with my wife because I think she'll love it, especially some of the wedding scenes. They're just really beautiful and well shot. So yeah, I mean, I really was delighted by this movie, and I think it is a top tier romantic comedy full of great performances from charming actors.
All right, Devendra Hardawar, take us through it.
Oh yeah, I love this movie. Add that to my soundboard, I guess. I was expecting to like it. I was not expecting for this movie to also be a really almost like subversive and deep take on like the immigrant experience, right? Like being somebody from a culture and then going back to that culture. And it's the whole idea of like not quite fitting in anywhere, right? It's like you're American, but you're othered a little, but then you go back to some place where you should feel at home and you're not because you're also American. You're not of them. So I think it really, balances that really well. Like as it's kind of an important thing too. Like that's the whole conflict with Michelle Yeoh's character is that Rachel, just can never be like them, like because she just has a completely different ideal. So there's a lot going on there. I think this is, it's a much deeper movie than I think I initially expected. There's a lot of stuff in the third act that's really interesting as well. Even down to the use of like a certain song that just feels like it's shattering certain, certain ideas and certain things you'd say. It's a gorgeous looking movie, and I'm glad to see that John Chu, somebody who we followed since Step Up to the Streets. Okay, remember that? We talked about we had him on the show at one point, I believe, and we chatted about some stuff. I'm very happy to see that he landed somewhere, with a property that kind of is worth his talents too. Like he did a couple other things recently, or he did the G.I. Joe sequel, which was not very good, and the Gem movie, I haven't seen that, but I haven't heard many good things. This movie just feels like it really fits into his style. It's elaborate, and there's some like beautiful flourishes, especially towards the wedding and towards like the bachelor and bachelorette parties. There's so much flair to this movie, and I think that all really helps. But yeah, ultimately it's very funny, it's very moving, it's very affecting. And, you kind of know where a rom-com will go, but I was really satisfied with how it all kind of ended up, right? Like it feels like it's very smart in a certain way. It's very character-based, and it doesn't feel just like, like the guy will chase after the girl and they'll all live happily ever after. There's a lot more going on there. I have some complaints with like one specific subplot.
Yeah,
that
I think I know exactly what you're talking about, Devendra.
Sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah,
it sticks out a lot. The movie's way too long already with it. We'll talk more about that in spoilers. But yeah, overall, very happy with this movie. I hope we see more things like this. I hope the strong opening shows that let's not be afraid to tell movies about non-white characters. In general. I saw Justin Lin tweeting last night. Somebody asked him, like, so will we see like a Better Luck Tomorrow sequel after this? And like even just him hinting at something like that is kind of amazing to me. So I hope this leads to many more great things.
Agreed completely. With hopefully this leads to more great things. Jeff, I also agree with your point that the fetishization of wealth, it's like a weird time for that to be happening. But I also agree with HT that like it's largely window dressing, in this movie. The movie, I don't think, has anything really particularly interesting to say about wealth.
Well, it does feel culturally appropriate.
Yeah,
now.
It does. It feels like true. It doesn't feel like it feels authentic. It doesn't feel.
There's a new booming middle class all throughout Asia, and also like a lot more newly rich people. So there's this idea of like wealth and money being thrown around. My only exposure to like going to Asia is when I go to Taiwan, but it's kind of crazy. It is kind of crazy, like the luxury department stores. I usually stay in like a shopping district, and literally every corner of that district, there will be a giant mall with all the luxury retailers, and everybody will be fighting to buy the same thing. It's the same store, like, a quarter of a mile away from each other. for several miles. It's insane. So there's a certain like wealth status thing that's definitely going on as well.
Yeah, there's a notable moment where Constance Wu goes and meets a friend in Singapore, and they live in a place.
All right, I'll talk a little bit about this movie. This movie means a lot to me, guys. I think how do I put this? I have a lot to say about it, and I'll try to divide it into non-spoiler and spoiler. So in terms of non-spoilers, I'll say that the one thing that this movie does that very few movies I've seen in my entire life have done is recognize that there is a difference between the Asian American and the Asian experience.
Yep.
And it is so refreshing that perspective is actually recognized. Because I will say, as an Asian American, and HT, I speak for myself, like what I'm about to describe may not comport with your lived reality. But for me as an Asian American, being Asian American is cool in many ways. Like, there's many aspects of our culture that I love and that I enjoy experiencing, many of which are actually on display in the movie. There's a lot of shots of like food porn, for instance, and mahjong and other sort of cultural totems of Asians that like you see throughout the film. But it can also be, in my opinion, an extremely lonely and isolating experience, because there's not that many Asian Americans in the country. We're only, I think, around 3% of the world's population. And it's, so often in popular culture, Asian Americans are just lumped in with Asians. It's just like, Asians, Asian Americans, it's all the same thing. But our experiences are so vastly different, and one of the ways they're vastly different is like the values that we're instilled is this kind of I would say, like, if you're first generation, this unwieldy mix of like what has come before and what is here in America.
Yeah.
Like, I think you saw this also in The Big Sick, right? With Kumail Nanjiani's character and him questioning like why his parents brought him here if all they want is for him to follow the old ways, right? And then what you end up living is some amalgamation of the old and the new ways, right? Some respect for your elders and filial piety and all that, but also combined with American ideas of individualism and pursuing your dreams. And like, these things often don't mix well together, and they often create a lot of tension both within a person and in their family. And this is one of the only movies I've seen in my entire life that has really, truly grappled with that in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. And that just means a lot to me, personally, to see that on screen.
Yeah. And Dave, like, among the few movies that have done this are like the Harold and Kumar movies. That's what we've had, Yeah. It's kind of crazy.
It's true. And I mean, I like, even this movie, I would say, does it much more explicitly than the Harold and Kumar movies. I think that that's arguably one of the downsides of this movie is like there are many moments in the movie where like Michelle Yeoh, there's a moment when Henry Golding says like, the first girl I brought home was like a Chinese professor, and then Michelle Yeoh says Chinese American, and then I'm like, when I'm watching that, I think to myself, "Ooh, I'm like, I know what she's talking about, but I'm worried that the audience won't understand like the distinction." And then Michelle Yeoh will then go on to explain exactly what the distinction is, and then I'm like, "Oh, okay, maybe that's a little like too much. That might be a little clunky."
Where it doesn't explain anything at all, too. Like it does. There's a whole thing like right in the last act.
Yeah.
Where it's not explained.
Overall, I thought the movie did a great job of kind of balancing what. Like explaining too much and not explaining anything at all. Like it was actually very important to John Chu. I've read in interviews like to not make it seem like Pandora or something like that, where you need to like explain the rules of this place. Like, this is a place that actually exists in real life, and the people who live there and who have lived there their whole lives wouldn't be talking about like all the customs here like it was some exotic thing. For them, it's just their lives,
Yeah,
And so
I think it gives you a really layered performance too, like whether you're Asian American or not. If you are Asian American or Asian, then you pick up on a few more things, and it's kind of like little gold nuggets that you find as you watch the film.
Yeah, completely. And actually, to me, it felt like John Chu, who directed this movie, like was trying to cram as many cultural references into this movie as possible. Like there's like all these like gratuitous food porn shots that and like mahjong and all these other and dumplings, right? And it felt like. It almost felt to me, and I haven't spoken with him about this specific thing, but it almost felt to me like he knew that this was the first time in 25 years that a Hollywood movie set in modern times had an all Asian and Asian American cast, and it could be another 25 years before we see another one of those, right? And so he's like, if I'm going to represent my culture, like if this film is going to be the vehicle through which my culture is represented, I'm going to put in as much as possible that is awesome about my culture into this movie. Mm-hmm.
And it's not like those things don't exist, too. Like those are normal everyday things.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
totally.
I wanted to say something about that too, because I think this is a lesson that I have learned many times, I've heard many times, and it seems to be proven true over and over and over again, that the more specific you get, the more general it is, you know? And I know that one of the reasons I really want to take my wife back to see this is because you talk about the food porn, there very much the relationship that we get between Nick Young and Rachel Wu is like built around a shared love of eating. You know, we see that in the very first moment they're together. It's like, I love eating. Me too. Let's see, how many of these are we going to have? You know, and they're like in this diner in New York. It has nothing to do with, and I like that, just that alone is something that my wife and I bonded over when we first met. Like we both love eating. And so there's this very specific thing that resonates for you culturally, but I think also because it's so specific, it works generally because you go, yeah, we love eating too. And we love, exotic foods and fun things. So these things, you don't have to pander to an audience. You can present truths. And just because I don't have the exact experience of eating dumplings, for example, I relate it to my own shared love of eating with my wife, the things that we like, the things we've had.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Another movie that comes to mind when you say that, Jeff, is like My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Right.
A lot of people saw their own family in that crazy wacky family that was on screen for that movie. So totally agree with that. Like the more specific you make it, the more, in some ways, the more relatable it is. But at the same time, there's also things that are really distinctive to Chinese culture in this film, specifically around family dynamics that I thought were really well depicted. I took, my parents came to see the screening with me, and they really loved the movie and found it very meaningful and recognized a lot in it. Because the fact of the matter is, I could say Asian, but more specifically Chinese families express their loves to their kids in different ways than American families do. And I think this movie does a great job of illustrating how terrifying, but also how admirable that can be. So many things to like about the movie, and Angie Han really summed this up well on Twitter when she said that there was one point in Crazy Rich Asians when I thought, I wonder what Asian audiences will think of X, and I wonder what mainstream American audiences will think of X, and then I realized it doesn't really matter because for once, the target audience is me. And I really felt that. It's so meaningful to be able to see your perspective, like someone who it feels like the filmmakers understand who you are, what you've been through. It's just extremely meaningful when you're able to see that on screen. And I'm not a big fan of romantic comedies. You look at my top 30 movies of all time, and I don't think there's a single romantic comedy in there. But the fact that John Chu is able to achieve, all the stuff that I just described within the confines of romantic comedy, I really enjoyed this movie a lot and found it very moving, and it resonated with me very deeply. So that's all I have to say about this movie. Pre-spoilers. Sorry, thank you for letting me go on like that, guys. I appreciate it. Is there anything else we want to say before we get to spoilers? Anything else? Anything else we want to call out?
I just want to say, like, the cast as a whole is surprisingly strong too. Like, this is a movie where, like, even minor characters you just kind of love for specific things. Like, I think Aquafina does great work here. which like her just like sort of persona. She is the, you know, comedy bomb we need in certain moments. I know a lot of her scenes I think were, you know, semi-improvised as well. So, you know, there's a lot going on there.
Well, what's really refreshing about this movie is that there are like extremely wacky characters, right? Like the character that Aquafina plays, or the character that Ronnie Chang plays. You know what I mean? These are characters that like you would see as a side, like the side only Asian character in another movie, right?
Yes.
But
yes.
I love that in this movie you get to see like quote unquote all different kinds of Asians. You know, like you get to see like
it's
super
the entire spectrum.
Yeah, you get to see like super goofy characters and super serious characters.
Yeah. Like Jimmy O Yang in this movie feels like almost like the stereotype you'd see of a lot of other, you know, Asian characters, like at times, and also like almost a riff on like what he does in Silicon Valley as well, just like more of like a rich, crazy bro. There's so much
the opposite extreme of the character he is on Silicon Valley, and that's what.
It's just me.
Sorry. Am I? Can you hear me now? Is everything okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I love Jimmy O Yang's character. I thought it was really, really wacky and wild. But yeah, for once, I think we're not depending on like one character to kind of represent Asians in a movie. You know what I mean? Although in some ways, like many people have said, like many people have pinned a lot of hopes on this movie to represent the Asian continent, all 4.4 billion people of it. But it's just refreshing to see a movie where like there's more than one Asian character, and you don't need to feel like, oh, that one person somehow represents, you know, Asians or Asian Americans to the wider world. That's super refreshing.
That's what I really like about this movie, is that it's hyper aware of the burden that it carries as the first all Asian American led cast in 25 years, and yet it doesn't care to, well, I don't say it cares. It doesn't feel the need to represent everyone, because it knows that it can't be everything for everyone.
Yes. And
I really admire that, because it does so well at what it strives to do. And I think that the fact that we have an all Asian cast allows us to feature this whole spectrum of what usually would be Asian stereotypes.
Yes.
But here they're just in a sea of people who are fully fleshed out characters, and by virtue of being like what used to be stereotypes in a movie where they are the centerpiece, they get to actually become characters.
Agree completely. All right, guys. Well, why don't we? There's much more to talk about. Why don't we dive into spoilers for Crazy Rich Asians starting right now?
Well, first, perhaps we should talk about our sponsor. And this is a sponsor that is a new sponsor for us. And it is one that I'm really excited to talk about, because this is something that I've been interested in. First of all, I have to say, I think I can speak to learning and feel that learning is a lifelong pursuit. Masterclass is now sponsoring /Filmcast, and I could not be happier, because Masterclass is a unique opportunity to continue and cultivate a love of learning with some of the coolest, most insanely A-list teachers that you can imagine. Masterclass really earns its name. These are masters of their profession, of their trade, that you can actually take a class from, you can learn from, you can hear the secrets of things that they do. I'm talking about...
Yeah, Jeff, what kind of caliber of teacher are we talking about here? Like, how important could these people possibly be?
Okay. The best of the best, the top of the top. I'm talking like Samuel L. Jackson on acting. Oof. I'm talking about Aaron Sorkin on screenwriting, Ron Howard on directing, Judd Apatow on comedy. And that's all the film people. That is kind of what brought me to the yard, so to speak, is the film people, because I'm like, dude, I want to see Aaron Sorkin talk about screenwriting. I want to take a class from Aaron Sorkin about screenwriting. Sign me up.
Oscar award-winning screenwriter Aaron Sorkin teaching you about screenwriting.
Yeah, photography from Annie Leibovitz. I mean, these are like the best of the best.
Literally the best. Like literally, you cannot think of anyone better. It is incredible the amount of talent they are able to get.
So I jump onto the website for Masterclass, and I'm like, I'm here. I'm here because I love movies and I want to do the Aaron Sorkin class. And then I start browsing around and I go, oh, I can learn how to shoot a basketball from Steph Curry. And that ended up being the first one I watched. I was like, I want to know how Steph Curry would teach someone how to shoot a basketball and dribble. Noted Golden State Warrior, multi-time MVP of the league, Steph Curry. That's the kind of stuff that's on this website. There's cooking classes. There's, I mean, everything you can imagine. It's not just film stuff. I'm sure people listening are going to be excited, as I was, about the film stuff and photography and directing and all that stuff. But there is all kinds of things. These are the best of the best. And they're not just about, I mean, for me, it's not like I'm going to enter the NBA now that I know how to shoot a basketball from Steph Curry. And it's not even that I necessarily want to, learn how to take a picture like Annie Leibovitz. This is entertainment. This is fascinating deep dives into how these people think about something that they are literally the best in the world at. It's R.L. Stine on writing children's books. It's amazing. It's like the bench is so deep here. So I urge you guys to check this out. And for a limited time, /Filmcast listeners get a free 7-day trial at masterclass.com/filmcast. You can learn from the best in the world at masterclass.com/filmcast. That's masterclass.com/filmcast for your 7-day free trial. That's free. Check this out. It will blow your mind that the number and the quality of the classes available here. It is absolutely cool.
All right, so then literally right there, I'm going to play the spoiler bumper.